little bit about YesPrep. We're an open enrollment charter school. For people that aren't familiar with charter schools, you might not be. The difference between us and a traditional ISD is basically all around funding. As an open enrollment, we have the same state testing standards as a traditional school district. We have to meet those standards. We just get less funding from the state, and we're not a taxing authority, and we can't issue bonds. So money is always a challenge for charter schools and in education specifically. We're only Houston focused and Houston based. We've got 15 campuses with 10,500 kids. 90% of those kids qualify for the free and reduced lunch program, which means they live under the poverty level. 90% of those are Hispanic, and then it breaks down from there. The way our charter is written, to get your high school diploma, you have to be accepted at a 4-year accredited university. In the last 14 years in a row, it's been 100% acceptance rate. Actually 2 weeks ago, we held an event called Senior Signing Day. It's like college draft day when you announce what team you're selecting. So they choose what college they're going to. So we had two got full rides to Harvard, one to Yale. So to give you a little bit of context, most of our kids come into 6th grade, 3 to 4 grade levels behind. So we have 7 years to catch them up to high school level. And another interesting number, in the US, we've spent $1.5 billion on remediation classes at the college level, from students leaving 12th grade into the freshman level. So we're here to help trying to change that. So just a little bit about us. A big problem in education, which actually probably is in any vertical, is data silos, right? In education, it's really rampant. You've got demographics, we have grades, we have data for everything, right? And then how do we use that data? And then how do we expose it? So teachers have a time poverty issue in education. So how can we give them data to make better decisions that then influence instruction and better our kids? And so the way we got to identity as a baseline, how do we give teachers that time back and make their jobs easier, right? So how do we consolidate these data silos and give them a single pane of glass? If you ask a teacher, they want one app rules them all, right? Which is not really possible. Especially when, like for us, there's probably 147 applications that we don't manage in our environment, but we want to give teachers flexibility to be innovative in the classroom. So here's kind of what our systems architecture is kind of looking like currently. And so, this is kind of a working case study, right? This is a lot of theory that we're putting into practice. So the most important piece for us is going to be the identity platform, right? We want one identity to handle all applications, which then there ties into a common data platform, which then we create all our connections to all our applications and then be able to surface best of breed applications to our teachers. So when a teacher in classroom wants to take grades on application A, we don't care anymore. They want application B, that's fine as well. So we're trying to figure out how do we tie that all together to give them the best experience, which then translates to a better experience for our students. So we want to go to a blinking light-free data center, right? There's going to be some things that have to stay on-premise currently, but we want to move every bit of our servers to the cloud, to Azure. We were one of the first EDU customers in Azure when we hosted a lot of application many, many years ago. But identity, data platform, student information system, any new applications, and then we want to create a consortium to provide the same service to small school districts, nonprofits, and other service centers to have that same experience at an enterprise level that they can afford to do. So, no on-premise. Identity requirements. Compliance with regulatory requirements, auditable process, reduce help desk. I'm not going to read through these slides. I'll take a few seconds to let you read through them. But it's pretty much vertical agnostic. Key part, single sign-on and user experience. Leveraging Azure Active Directory. So currently, we want to use AD Premium, which unfortunately is expensive. But as an education customer, we get to take advantage of really steep discounts, thanks to Microsoft. We want to take key data from our systems authority, populate them to Azure, link students to schools, student to teacher, student to parents, And then we want to tie login identity to person ID and only one ID, right? So we want to be able to take a kid's Gmail account, convert it, use it for our one single identity, so they're only using a YesPrep account. So I'm going to turn it over to the smart person that's at this table here and kind of talk about our design and how we're going from a hybrid and on-prem to a full cloud.
Okay, great. Thanks, Troy. I'll turn this way toward it. So got an architectural diagram over here. I'll go back one. So here are some kind of tenets of our design here. First, in this current environment they're working in, they actually are already using Azure Active Directory, but only in the context of Office 365. And in their situation, they actually have two tenants. One that holds their students, which isn't synchronized to anything. They're cloud-only identities. They're managed in the cloud, and that's the only kind of source is that directory itself. They have staff. Now, those folks exist in a current Active Directory, and they're being synchronized through Azure AD Connect today into Azure AD, the free version, just to support login to Office 365. So they actually have some infrastructure already in place, and that was the starting point. So what we're looking to do is consolidate those two different Azure Active Directories into a single one, not too terribly difficult, and bring those into one so that we'd have one namespace for students, a student.domain versus staff who would be in just domain. Bring those together. One of the kind of design principles that we're kind of going forward with is we're kind of looking at the idea of moving into a completely cloud world. So as much as we can move away from traditional concepts like on-prem AD, we're leaning toward that. So when we first looked at it, we said, well, where are we going to get the student account information from? And that was pretty straightforward. If you look kind of here in the bottom left, this all information is contained in a SunGuard eSchool Plus student information system. And we can build database views that let Microsoft Identity tools consume that. And that's a pretty well-known kind of an HR-driven scenario type construct. So that was pretty straightforward. But then we had to think of, what are we going to do with that? We're going to create identities in Active Directory and then sync those up to the cloud like we're doing with the staff. And we realized that, moving forward to cloud only, is it possible that they don't need an AD account at all? So we looked at a lot of different things they'd have to use and do. And in fact, they really don't necessarily have one today. So we said, okay, we're just going to forego the on-prem AD and just go directly from the student information system straight to the cloud. And that's kind of what we're showing here. And of course, all of that infrastructure, we're building new in Azure Infrastructure as a Service. No new on-prem net new servers. So those are pretty straightforward. We're taking advantage of a very, very new feature of Azure AD Connect. So when we think of Azure AD Connect, we think of AD on the left and Azure AD on the right, and that's pretty much the scope. Maybe a couple ADs on the left and Azure AD on the right, but we're taking advantage of a new feature that lets us connect to other data sources, in this case, actually a SQL data source, and pull that into Azure AD Connect and then provision that up to the cloud. So that's an exciting new capability of the Azure AD Connect synchronization tool that we're taking advantage of in this one. It used to be that it was a kind of a closed preview. It's actually now available for anyone to use. So you might start to think in your environment, hey, are there other places besides AD that I have identities that I want to take to the cloud? So that's opening up those new capabilities. So remember we said we were trying to take advantage of things in the cloud. So we take a look along the top applications. In the top center, one we're already using, Microsoft's first-party apps like Office 365. And we're going to be adding new things to it. For example, some of the capabilities in EMS. We're looking at potentially Intune, as well as the other things that come along in that suite. Since the pricing works so well, it just makes sense to get that whole bundle and use the features that make sense. The other thing that they're bringing on board is a number of new applications that are software as a service, right? And specifically, they're doing some for kind of a service management system, and also another kind of student, what type of system?
That's right. So we're deploying lynda.com to all our staff and students as a training resource. Low costs, and then provide a single sign-on solution. And then, as Frank will talk about with the app proxy, is we actually have a custom dev team. We build a lot of internal applications around needs of the organization, like discipline. We do discipline completely different than what's in most school districts and what's reported to the state. So we have our own internal system. in a tool that's been developed. And so now we can actually expose that through this proxy.
Right, and there's actually two pieces of that. We have applications that are coming on board that kind of natively know how to talk to Azure Active Directory, right? In addition, their own internal development team, we actually sat down with them, showed them the architecture, and their lead says, well, I've already looked at the kind of the Microsoft tools for talking to Azure Active Directory, and I think I already have everything I need to get this project going. He said, this programming model is so similar to what I'm using today that, you know, probably within a week I'll be ready to prototype it. So if you look at the very, very top left, those custom line of business apps, you know, whether they're new apps or apps that are undergoing revision, you know, they're being brought in as native Azure Active Directory integrated applications. But there's still kind of a catalog of applications that were written using the old Active Directory on-prem integration with using integrated Windows auth, Kerberos, those sorts of things. And those are represented in the far bottom right. And now with the Azure Web Application Proxy, we're able to make those applications available with that same login that they're accessing all the other services with. So they all fall into the same single sign-on, and they all have the same user experience. So to them, whether the app uses Azure AD directly or works through this application proxy, unless you were really sharp and knew what was going on and looked under the covers, it all looks and feels the same. It's all one logon, all one integrated experience, all one management place for identities. And so these are really kind of the key parts of what we're building out there. And then the only other part I didn't really touch on is that along the bottom, because we do have to do some things with Active Directory that we're hosting in infrastructure as a service, there is a Azure site-to-site VPN that allows the stuff that's being hosted in Azure and the stuff that's internal to be able to communicate where needed.
And then the long-term goal is start taking out piece by piece so it's then fully in Azure. And so including all domain controllers, we're going to start our first pilot this summer with students, with Azure Domain Join, with Windows 10 as our first experiment to get to that route. And then we'll move it to staff. Teachers are really picky about the experiences, and so students less so. They're used to technology more than teachers are. So auto provisioning to Azure Active Directory, like Frank said, we're going to be going straight from our student information system and then Active Directory for staff through AD Connect and then to Azure. And of course, everything for us is driven by FERPA. Everyone has some kind of regulation that they have to follow. It's also a big reason why I'm opposed to Google for education. There's around student data privacy issues, and I don't believe they actually care about it. But I'm not going to talk about this. But down the bottom, and I've learned a lot being in this room, and this is a great audience as far as skills that are in the room. Like I said, you always hire somebody that's smarter than you as a manager, and so, which is why we get to hire Frank. But having conditional access to student data, which is really key, especially as we build applications going forward, and then privileged access and PIM. So I've actually learned a lot since yesterday, and it's fun. Too bad I don't get to do all this myself, but I do have to play manager sometimes. All right, and so back to our kind of common data platform. We're basing everything off of the EdFi data platform, which is a data standard. It's pretty much aligned to SEDS, and it's all open source, and it's around data standards for education specifically. Which is why I asked the gentleman from State of Indiana if they've heard of it. So the whole idea is not to get locked into ecosystems, which is what Google does for education. There's Clever that's out there, and it locks you into this very tight ecosystem. We want to go to this open standards-based model, bring everything in and tie it into our data platform, and then be able to expose all that data and digest it and then actually use it at the end of the day. So here's kind of what their architecture looks like. The best part, like I said, it's open source, it's all free. And it's the Dell Foundation that's funding it behind it. So, and we like Dell. They give us lots of money, by the way. That was not a plug-in for Dell and Michael Dell himself, but whatever. So, and then the next thing, which we kind of forced Oxford into thinking about this discussion, is how do you do identity as a service, right? So like for my team, I have a team of 5. I have 3 people on the help desk, a system admin and a system engineer, and then myself. So back to, I started out at YesPrep, I was the Exchange admin, then Link admin, then Cisco engineer, the wireless engineer, so forth, and then managing a bunch of government contracts, which are a nightmare. So with identity as a service is how do we go to some kind of subscription model, right? Is with a small team, and we're very cyclical. So in the summertime, I don't need consumption, right? All my students are gone for the summer. So for 10,000 kids, why should I continue to pay for them? So we're currently trying to work with Oxford to figure out how do we do this on a cost per staff, student, and parent model, because you have to have parents included into the education life cycle to truly be successful. So it gives us some predictable costs, lets you manage OCG's resources because they've got some really smart people and they know identity well, and it gives me an ability to leverage best of breed tools with a very small team. So we're way ahead of time because I speak really fast. Unfortunately, it's one of my flaws. Of course, you know all the sponsors. And then I can open up for questions if there are any. Yes, sir.
Besides the auto provisioning, how do you deal with deprovisioning?
So that is a challenge. So he asked about how do we handle deprovisioning. This is why Frank is here, to help us figure out how we do the auto provisioning, then same as deprovisioning. And it's
Right, it's very similar. We basically take signals from the student information system and the staff management systems, and when they're indicated that the person needs to be deactivated, basically that signal is processed through Azure AD Connect, and it basically flips the bit that says this account's disabled.
How you disable it, park it for 2 months or so?
Yeah.
so actually for quite a while. Our retention standards in education are really high. So, you know, anything to do with student data it basically it's a long record, especially digital, even in email. I have to retain email for at least 4 years, which is why Office 365 is perfect for us. I don't have to pay for storage anymore. Well, no, I don't because it's free. Sorry, not to push this button home. It is an advantage of education. Free. We love that word.
Question.
So, given your sort of one ID principle and maybe your data standard, how are you accommodating situations where a parent might be a teacher or a student might also be a parent, and you're building your relationships in your data model?
So if I can paraphrase this question, so how are we going to provide a unique ID to someone that crosses different platforms or positions, as in teacher who is also a parent, which I was actually an employee and a parent. So my son actually went to Yes Prep and graduated from Yes Prep. So by providing, we'll have a specific unique ID, and it's going to be role-based, access-based. Luckily, we don't have a lot of prime examples to figure that out, and our roadmap for parents is way down the road. We have a lot of internal things to fix first.
So your plan is if I'm a parent and a teacher, I would have 2 IDs.
No, you'd still have a single ID. It'd be, so repeat the question. So as a parent, I'd have 2 IDs, or an employee as 2 IDs if I was a parent and employee, correct? So basically, as a YesPrep employee, right, yesprep.org, it's almost like a child domain in an AD forest, right, is student, a parent, or YesPrep, all into that unique ID.
So
Or
ID, and then either your data model
our data model is going to, correct.
Be smart enough to ask you.
Yeah, what is your role, what is your location, right, or however granular you want to get, correct.
Yeah, and it'll support multiple roles on a single identity.
Yeah.
Now, once we get, there's obviously challenges, and it's one of the big decision points is kind of going back between that. Does it make sense to have 2 accounts? Does it make sense to have 1 account with multiple roles? And you can come up with good arguments either way. Most of the time, it comes down to what the applications are able to support. If it's a custom developed app, you can put some of that intelligence in there. If it's a commercial off the shelf, sometimes you're very limited in the application's ability to deal with it. So a lot of times the application is a limiting factor rather than the platform.
Yeah.
I mean, my question is because you're building a platform, I was interested in your strategy and the thinking around it.
Yeah, our goal is to aim toward a single multi-role identity, but if we get to a point where we have to separate them, then we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yes, sir.
Sorry about that. Do we point the same
Yeah,
person?
we'll go
Yes,
there,
yes.
sorry.
Do the students need access to any resources that
So the question was, do students need access to any internal resources, whether it's AD or what else? No. Yeah, we actually, as an organization, spent more time focusing on staff than students. And so it's basic generic accounts, access to the internet, not a lot of tools or resources being used specifically, where like we're going to roll out learning management system, which is why we'll leverage the cloud identity. But everything going forward for our students, all in the cloud.
Yeah. And I think what kind of informs that is the fact that they don't have AD accounts today. So
Yeah.
it's not like we're having to support something that's already in place, because the few places the students, there is no one-to-one student to ID today. You know, there are some of these role accounts, like this is Classroom A login, where everyone logs into
Yeah,
their
one
computer with
generic
that.
account.
Yeah, so some of those. So they're actually moving from these very kind of generic, very few accounts to actually a one-on-one model.
Yeah.
And that's something new for them.
Very new. Yes, sir.
I would just, on that same idea of like the parent-teacher, it seems like you're gonna run into trouble because as a teacher, I have access to student information, and as a parent, I have access to my child's information, and those are coming probably out of the same back end, and that back end would need to understand the difference, because I shouldn't get the same privileges as a parent that I do as a teacher. Possibly. I might have more, I might have less that I can see about my child
Correct.
than I see about a student.
Yeah, in many cases, the application will recognize you're a multi-role person and ask you to choose, you know, which role do you want to perform in this application, because I know you could be one or the other.
Yeah, and this might be a case in point for us to try at some point of, or some form of MFA to then delineate that difference. You know, this is still some trial and error in theory.
Yeah, but the key thing is the application has to be able to handle that. Otherwise, you have to fall back to kind of two accounts. And there's some places where user, you know, a particular role just won't be able to use that application at all. Like no one who is a student-only role would be able to access, you know, something that would be a staff-type application. So there are some possible overlaps, and there are some like kind of impossible overlaps. And again, it really comes down to how can the application work with it? Yes?
Or your identity platform can force the user to choose on login.
Yes.
Yeah, but we really think that's more like the purview of the at the application side. But
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
It depends if you're using off-the-shelf apps.
That is a big one. Yeah, you know, if you're writing your own app, you have a lot more flexibility. If you're having to use something off the shelf, you usually have to conform to their model. So.
Yeah, and we're trying to force a lot of education vendors to conform to our model, which is the Ed5 standard, because then we can control more.
So another hand over here.
What is your student information system?
So our student information system is SunGuard eSchool Plus, which is SQL backend, on-premise currently. They have a hosted version as well. Every student information system that's out there is terrible. It's one of the lesser evils. I'm just going to say it, which is actually what most education software is, really. It's actually terribly written. It's all a pretty interface, but not functioning well. So, but that's just my opinion. Thank y'all very much.
Were there any other questions?
Nope. Deal.
I have one question.
Yes.
Do you have any students under the age of 13?
Any students on the?
Under the age of 13 years old?
Oh, no. So we serve only 6th grade through 12th grade. So we're not in that, well, not yet. We're actually talking about doing elementary school, so that's going to be another.
Yeah, which is actually an interesting question, because as soon as you said that, I'm going back to some conversations that we had. When we think of, you know, a user ID and password, you know, as adults, you know, we kind of get that concept, right? If you're talking about children, you know, much younger than that, especially, you know, as smart as kids are today about technology, even the idea of, well, I have a username and a password that I have to remember, below a certain age range, that's a hard concept to, you know, kind of, you know, impress upon them. So usually once you get below that level, you start to get away from the one-on-one IDs, and sometimes you get more into the classroom level. It's just a cognitive type thing, yeah.
I think perhaps Luke's was your question more aimed towards federal laws.
Oh, actually, that was not my real question. It was just, I was just trying to find out
Age.
if they have that problem.
consent for every student 12 years or younger that they can get an Apple ID
Yes, or whatever.
So
It's
how
a,
do you
that
get that into an identity management life cycle so that students on day one have access to all this?
it's a great question.
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
think
parent
the same thing I was
involvement
thinking,
is getting parents involved and signing off on those things to be involved is always a challenge in school. Actually, thanks for bringing that up, though. That's going to be added to the discussion.
Yeah, so another kind of, because we think of, education as having certain characteristics that are different than other verticals. And with Yes Prep, they're kind of regardless of the number of students, they pretty much control what's going on. It's all under one organization. When we start looking at the state level, all of these different independent school districts, independent seems to be the key word, right? They're very much into, this is my data, and I am very picky about who gets to access it, even, to help me out. Yeah. And many times these kind of decisions and kind of islands of data tend to fall at those levels. So you can go to a particular northern state I was looking at, kind of a mid-sized one. They said, well, we have to deal with 400 different, basically independent districts who may go any number of direction, and we have no ability to force them to do anything. We can suggest, we can lead them, we can provide platforms, but at the end of the day, we don't have a stick, only a carrot. And that can be true. We're looking at one where each of those 400 is considering going out and getting their own Azure AD and Office 365. And how can we use all those identities for access to applications? So there's some challenging things when you get to those scales. I think, I've got 5, 6 Active Directory for us, my deal's complicated. No, get it to education and it gets strange. And not only do they have the number of them, their interest in running their own destiny kind of becomes an overriding challenge in education.
And schools don't like to collaborate with other schools. We love reinventing the wheel. I don't know why I haven't figured that one out yet. It's just everyone wants to do their own thing. And then how do we tie into higher ed, right? Is how do we take that experience from the K-12 market into the higher ed market so that data is following that student through the full life cycle. That way the student's set up for success to finish college or whatever career path they choose.
Right. And one of the other kind of characteristics of education is you've got 15 schools. How many people? You said you have 5 people, right? A lot of which are answering the phone all day.
Yeah.
So
it's
not
15,
like you got a lot of IT talent just waiting to pick up on projects. So.
Yeah, it's 15 schools, so it's 1,100 staff, 10,000 kids, 5,000 devices, and 3 people to manage. Great use of resources.
Yeah,
But it's a challenge in any school district, right? Is every dollar spent on technology is a dollar not spent in the classroom, and our mission in education is to educate children.
Many school districts have no dedicated IT people. Somebody does it in their off time.
Yeah, or it's a teacher's side job. So. Well, thank you.